Rob here with a kind of a, well, another commentary video. This is more of a coffee with Rob, but it features Diet Coke instead. I don't feel like coffee right now. And I want to talk about what a lot of people are discussing right now, which is an issue with Wizards of the Coast and this book, Candlekeep Mysteries. Now, apparently, the circumstance is, and I've verified it with a little research, going on to Twitter posts from the author of the affected article and finding out the details. Apparently, a guy whose handle is Panzerlion wrote an adventure as a freelance writer for Wizards of the Coast, following their established procedures. He gave them a pitch for it. They accepted the pitch. He wrote the adventure, rough draft of the adventure, sent it in. They accepted it. They developed it, play tested it, but he was paid for his work, and then Wizards of the Coast basically took it from there. He took advantage of the opportunities Wizard had to help him promote his work by giving him social media access, and he did the rounds with various sites saying, hey, this is the work, it's in the book, this is this part of the adventure. It's called the Book of Cylinders if you have it. And I made this thing. Then Wizards does ship copies of the product to the contributors, which is kind of a nice thing. The smaller companies don't necessarily do that, but it's cool when they do. And he got a copy of it, and he read his stuff, and he was blown away because the work was only vaguely what he remembered writing, because the editing had stripped out a lot of his content, a lot of his intentions for what the work was going to be. And it went from being this kind of multifaceted adventure, giving the players options and positing this lore from, early in the Forgotten Realms history, and using some, from the sound of what he made, some very interesting elements that could have been a really cool adventure. And squeezing it into 9 pages plus, including maps in there, into the book. And he's upset about that, as many writers are when they find out what happens to their work in editing. And he said, this isn't what I wrote. Please don't put my name in anything because this isn't my work. I don't think he returned the money that they gave him for it, but he was not happy. So, of course, there's the usual outrage. There's people who are like, I can't believe Wizards would do something like that. So I think it's important for a little perspective, which is, after all, the major thing I offer is perspective. And this is simply this. Mr. Panzerlion's experience is no different from a lot of other writers who first get into giving their work to a major publisher. Yes, some of the smaller publishers maybe will say, okay, we'll take your stuff, do minimal editing, and put it out. Maybe they do. But that was never going to happen with this. Because, first of all, there is many layers to a work like Candlekeep Adventures. First of all, you have a project lead. They have the overall vision of how the work is going to be when it comes out, how much room to apportion to particular works, what the overall feel and theme of the thing is going to be, and, lots of elements like that. Then they have teams who are in charge of various processes, getting the art and making sure it jives up with the adventures, and coordinating with the writers so that they know what they're focused on. And some of this is handled by the numbers. Basically, Wizards has a process. And from the sound of it, Panzerlion followed the process. He gave them a pitch. He was accepted. He gave them the draft. They took it, they paid him, and that was it. And quite frankly, that's a writer's job. They give content out. There aren't a lot of writers who are so influential that they can say, publish this. Oh yeah, clean up, spelling errors, do your basic editing, but it stays like this. This is my work, so it stays like this. That's what people want. Some writers write things and they don't care. They just hand it in, take their paycheck, and they trust that the company will do the best they can with what they did. But very few writers actually have the cachet to be able to say, you don't get to change my stuff and I get to finally write off on what you're doing. As a matter of fact, it's very clear that outside of participating in efforts to promote their work, the writers don't have any say or influence. They may be consulted and contacted about certain elements, but Wizards isn't really required to do that. And also, once a writer hands off their things to the publisher can do whatever they want because they've already paid for it. Everything that's contained inside of that is theirs. So, if they want to take out every third word and publish that, they can. They can make it look as bad as they want. They can do whatever they want. It's theirs. Which is an unfortunate circumstance that is basically part of the power trip of writing. That is reality. That is not something that is unique. That is not, unfortunately, uncommon. And especially for a major company like, Hasbro / Wizards of the Coast, where everything is focus tested and everything is laid out. Basically, they took his adventure, and one of the missions had to be you go to save these poor defenseless, this primitive race, and there's this big evil threat, and you have to go and bash the big evil threat. The overall ebb and flow of Candlekeep Mysteries required one of the adventures to be like that, and they chose Book of Cylinders to be essentially like that. The party finds out about a situation, they go and help peoples that can't help themselves. In this case, Gripply. I always like Gripplies. They're the frog people. They've kind of been a primitive race, but generally not an evil one. Oftentimes they're pretty helpful. I'm pretty happy I have the Altar Quest game, because the frocks in that will be perfect for Gripply. So I got plenty of miniatures for the Gripply folk. But the thing is, it seems, and this is part of his umbrage, was that Wizards seem to backslide into some of their other older trends for creating the adventure. For example, the Gripply are a hapless primitive race that are kind of stuck with a malevolent, wanty menace that's, threatening them. I'm not giving any real spoilers to this because people have been talking about this for quite a while, so if you haven't heard of this, well, hopefully it's not spoilers. If you plan on playing through the adventure, I'm sure it lets you, attack many evil things. But here's the thing, some people are like, but Wizards doesn't do evil races anymore. They don't do evil, and they don't do primitives, they don't make mockeries of different races, and they But here's the thing. Again, there's the overall project lead who has the vision for everything, and at some point they're like, okay, at this stage we want to cleanse the palate of whatever came around it, and at this level we want them to have something where they can go out, feel good about fighting a certain evil. It's unequivocally evil. They're trying to do something very nasty. So as a result, the players get to go out, they get to help some people who can't help themselves and be cool. That's it. That's as much as you need to go into on that. It's only a 9-page adventure. It briefly describes what the Gripply are like. It frames everything with your initial contact, and you go through all the steps. Like an adventure. And even though there are evil folk in it, doesn't necessarily say that the entire race is evil. It just says that group is evil, so that really doesn't violate anything. It also doesn't say that all Gripply are hapless primitives. Certainly there are probably some pretty powerful Gripply out there, and so on and so forth. Just these happen to not be so. So I don't really see that as any kind of violation. It just presents a scenario where the players can come in and help some people who can't help themselves and be heroes, which I think is pretty cool. I would be very interested, of course, into seeing what Mr. Panzerlion's original work was like, but I can't because Wizards owns it, and he would admit that too. He can't do anything with his original work. So, as I said, he went to the social media, and he protested because he didn't realize what they were going to do to his stuff. So when he went out and promoted it, he talked about his original vision for the adventure, And when he got a hold of it, it's like, oh, everything I said wasn't true, but not because of me, but because of what they did when I wasn't aware of what they were doing with my work. This is a kind of a charming naivete, but at the same time, that's what it is. It's being naive, not knowing exactly what the whole vision is. He made an interesting sounding adventure, and I definitely would definitely be cool to have access to that. I really hope that he can mend fences with Wizards of the Coast and say, hey, I had a great idea. Maybe we could develop it. And maybe they would. It sounds like there's plenty of meat on that bone. But for all of you writers out there, if the moment you sign off on that contract to write for somebody, for instance, and you turn over your work, it's not yours anymore. It's owned by someone else, and they can do whatever they want to do with it. They can twist that vision to fit their vision, and all you can do is cash your check and say, hey, I had a hand in that. Writing something doesn't necessarily mean you wrote the final product. It means you came up with the initial spark, maybe you created the characters, and if you, in your vision, really do match the publisher's vision, and from the sound of it, it would have taken like telepathy to do that, because it sounds like they just gave a very general sketch of what they wanted. So many thousands of words is an adventure, and boom, that's what he did. And it sounds like he made more than what they needed trying to develop this great idea of his, and when it came down to it and they dropped the axe on a lot of his ideas, it was because it was too much. There was too much there that they couldn't use, or it wasn't the kind of adventure that they were looking for. Maybe it didn't fit any of the adventures. I'm not a part of that team, and honestly, nobody who isn't in a part of that team can really say what decisions they made and so on. He says that not all writers had that same experience because theirs were tabbed for different functions and they had more to say about it, whereas he wasn't consulted with anything else because they really didn't need anything else out of him. They weren't going with a lot of those initial ideas, and they were just interested in developing one little piece, one possible path out of his overall choices of stories. So I would generally urge people to kind of pump the brakes a little bit. It's easy to hear a wounded writer saying, I feel like my stuff has been misrepresented. If you don't understand how publishing works, if you don't understand how a team-based process works. And I'll say, I'm right now preparing to write something for another company. And if I write that and I turn it over and I get a copy of it and I look at it and it's like, it's got my name on it, and I look through it, and if they edit the heck out of it so that there's a lot of stuff that isn't, I'll be somewhat surprised because I intend to work with them as I'm developing it. They'll talk to me, it'll be on a living document, which is completely unlike what they do at Wizards, which is fine with me. Actually, it'll mean I have more say over it, and it'll be a lot closer to what I envision, which is awesome. Not everybody gets that opportunity. But ultimately, if they want, they can take it and do anything they want, and I have no say over it. I have absolutely none. They could twist it all they want. And it's their right because they would have paid me for it, and they will own that work for whatever they want to do with it. And that's just a reality writers have to face. Until you are a George R.R. Martin, until you are you've got one of those names. Even the best writers out there that you're familiar with their work, their first stuff was probably just done the exact same way. So if you absolutely loved the works of my mind is blanking today, but if you love Douglas Adams, for instance, I'm sure he had some stories about dealing with editors. I'm sure that Terry Pratchett had some editors who butchered some of his earlier works, and maybe they continue to alter them into the shape that they were up to his last works. There's certainly going to be some editorial oversight in everything that you read. So some works, undoubtedly, that are loved today are loved more because of some of the editing changes. Sad but true. Eventually writers find their own voice, and maybe they get the notoriety where they can have more of their own input in their works, but that's not generally a safe assumption. Mostly there's teams behind any good writer. So if you had some romantic notions that you would say turn in the great adventure, turn it into Wizards, and they would print it verbatim with your name on it, that's probably never going to happen at Wizards. And matter of fact, even the people at the top, if Jeremy Crawford writes something, his work gets edited too. Anything that anybody does gets treated by a team of editors, almost to the point where their stuff is suggestions, a direction, a vector to go in. But unless you are one of those types of people, don't count on your stuff escaping cuts in such a way that things you think are very important might not fit the corporate vision, might not fit the development team's vision. Even if you're writing for a smaller company like, Trollord or Goodman or something like that, if you're going to get into those companies as a writer, anything that you turn in, they have, their own interests to protect. They will look through your stuff, and they may edit it as they wish. They may change stat blocks. They may change encounter orders. They may, whatever. They may pull stuff out wholesale, things that you thought were important. That's what writing is. So unless you're self-publishing, which, let's face it, is an option, it's an especially good option for those who don't have the ego to turn their stuff over to an editor and let them have their way with your work. Yeah, self-publish. You can do that, unless, of course, you've already signed off on that work to somebody else and then they own it. But, you could do that if you feel that passionate and don't want somebody taking an editorial scalpel to your work. That's fine. But if you really want access to great publishing, you want your name to resonate in those halls, then you have to go dance their tune. If you want your work to be in a bound copy that millions of people will pick up, and they'll sell millions of copies of this. It's actually, from what I've read of it so far, it's been pretty good. Nice changes of pace and everything. I thought it was all going to be mystery adventures. It's not, which is fine. And I love the map that they had in here of Candlekeep itself. It's pretty cool. But I personally can't be mad at Wizards for what they did. And honestly, he was honest too in his Twitter post. He said this is their process, and I knew these were the steps. He just didn't realize how much they could change his stuff. And again, the first time that happens to you, it's going to be a shock. It is. It is for almost all writers. I guarantee it. But it's one that you gotta be prepared for, and don't let it get you to be bitter. I think he handled it rather poorly because he went on Twitter, complained, explained his point of view, but in a way that made it quite clear that he was very unhappy. And Wizards takes note of things like that. Every corporation does. I don't care where you're working. If they have any social media presence, they keep an eye on the people who work for them and see what they say about their company. And if it's something inflammatory, you're going to get talked to. And if it's something really inflammatory, you can get let go without actually doing it on the clock, because that all matters in this connected world, and the companies understand that. So I hope that Panzerlion, as his handle he prefers to be called, his name is in there, but I'm not gonna use it for his own purpose. I hope that he mends fences, because the adventure's a good one. I mean, it could be fun, and his ideas as he posted sounded really good. It just would have had to be part of a much bigger work. It would have required more development, different art, a larger focus on those elements. Could they have bumped it up to a higher level adventure and then had those nuances and intricacies? They could have, certainly. And maybe with a different project lead, maybe that might have happened. But in this case, that wasn't, and he's just a part of the overall anthology of adventures. And for a lot of people that would love that opportunity to have their name published in something that is a part of the world's greatest role-playing game, he can use that as a springboard, hopefully. I don't think this is the last we're going to see of him. So, that being said, it's a success for him. He's going to have a lot of news stirred up. This is not I'm talking about it, so it's obviously fairly big. But don't go hating Wizards of the Coast. They are what they are. They are a corporation, and the folks who had handles on that had purposes. They were told what to do. They have expectations. And again, overall, it's pretty tight from what I've read so far. And I haven't detailedly read the whole thing where I would feel comfortable giving a review. But there are some adventures in there that I'm definitely looking forward to. So, anyhow, thank you for joining me. I am Rob. This is my thoughts. And thank you for sharing a tasty beverage with me. Until next time, farewell.